The woman stood on the auction block with her eyes downcast, and Tobias Zimmerman could see the dried blood on her torn sleeve before he saw her face. It was 1872 in Leavenworth, Kansas, and the summer heat pressed down like a physical weight on the crowd gathered in the town square. Tobias had ridden in from his ranch 15 miles out just to pick up supplies, but the commotion near the courthouse had drawn him like iron to a magnet. What he witnessed made his stomach turn. A man in a stained brown suit was calling out prices while a young woman stood trembling on a makeshift platform, her wrists bound with frayed rope. "This here is prime labor, gentlemen," the auctioneer shouted, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "Strong back, good health, and she can read and write. Do I hear $50? Tobias pushed through the crowd, his jaw clenched tight. He knew what this was. The woman owed someone money, or her family did, and now her labor was being sold to the highest bidder to settle the debt. It was legal, technically, though it left a bitter taste in his mouth. The practice reminded him too much of other injustices he had witnessed, ones that should have ended with the war. The woman finally lifted her head, and Tobias felt his breath catch. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight despite its disheveled state. Her eyes were green, bright and defiant even as her body shook. There was a purple bruise blooming along her left cheekbone. $50, someone called from the back. 60, another voice joined in. Tobias watched the woman's face pale with each bid. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and he could see her fighting to keep her composure. Something about her determination in the face of such degradation struck him deeply. 75, a rough voice said, and Tobias turned to see Buck Morrison, a neighboring rancher known for working his help until they dropped. Morrison had a cruel streak a mile wide and a reputation for mistreating anyone under his authority. The woman's eyes found Morrison in the crowd, and Tobias saw naked fear flash across her face before she mastered it. That look decided him. $200, Tobias called out, his voice clear and firm. The crowd went silent. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. $200 was more than 3 times the highest bid, an enormous sum that could buy a good horse or seed for an entire season's planting. 200 going once, the auctioneer said quickly, clearly eager to close the deal before Tobias changed his mind. Going twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat. Tobias made his way to the platform, counting out bills from his leather wallet with steady hands. His heart was pounding, and he was not entirely sure what had possessed him to spend that much money he had been saving for a new barn. But when he looked up at the woman again, seeing the confusion and wariness in her eyes, he knew he could not have done otherwise. The auctioneer handed him a paper. "She is contracted to you for 5 years of labor, or until the debt of $142 is paid off, whichever comes first." "Untie her hands," Tobias said quietly. "Well now, that is up to you, I suppose. She is your responsibility now." Tobias climbed onto the platform and pulled out his pocket knife. The woman flinched backward, but he just cut through the ropes binding her wrists. The fibers had rubbed her skin raw, and he could see the angry red marks they left behind. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She nodded stiffly, not meeting his eyes. "Then come with me. My wagon is at the general store." He turned and walked away, trusting her to follow. He could feel the eyes of the town on his back, could hear the whispers starting. Tobias Zimmerman, the lonely rancher who kept to himself, had just spent a fortune on a woman. The gossips would have a field day with this. At the general store, he loaded his supplies into the back of the wagon while the woman stood awkwardly nearby, her arms wrapped around herself. He noticed she was wearing a thin dress that had seen better days, and her shoes were held together more by hope than leather. "What is your name?" he asked as he secured the last bag of flour. "Rosalie Barrett," she said quietly. It was the first time he had heard her voice, and it was softer than he expected, with a slight tremor that she was clearly trying to hide. "I am Tobias Zimmerman. My ranch is about 15 miles northwest of here. Do you have any belongings you need to collect?" She shook her head. "Everything I owned was sold to pay the debt." He nodded and held out his hand to help her into the wagon seat. She hesitated for a long moment before taking it, and he could feel how cold her fingers were despite the heat of the day. They rode in silence for the first few miles, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of his 2 draft horses. Tobias could feel the tension radiating from Rosalie, could see how she held herself rigid, as far from him as she could get on the narrow seat. Finally she spoke. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Buy me. Spend all that money." She turned to look at him for the first time, her green eyes searching his face. "Why?" Tobias was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, the importance of what he said next. "Because you looked like you needed someone too," he said finally. "And because no person should be sold like cattle, no matter what the law says is legal. I saw Morrison bidding, and I have heard stories about how he treats people. I could not let that happen. You do not even know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know what it is like to feel helpless, and I know what it is like to want someone to stand up for you when you cannot stand up for yourself." She was silent again, but he could sense something shifting in the air between them. After a while she spoke again, her voice even softer than before. "What do you expect from me?" "Honest work for fair treatment," Tobias said. "I run a cattle ranch. I could use help with the chickens, the garden, cooking, and general household tasks. I have been managing on my own since my mother passed 2 years ago, and I will admit the house has suffered for it. But I will not work you beyond what is reasonable. You will have your own room and you will be treated with respect. That is my promise to you. And when the 5 years are up, when the debt is paid, you will be free to go wherever you want. I will not hold you beyond what the contract requires." Rosalie turned to stare out at the rolling prairie, and Tobias let the silence settle between them again. He understood her wariness. She had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe his words. Trust would have to be earned, and he was prepared to be patient. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was not much to look at from a distance, just a simple house, a barn, and a few outbuildings scattered across the property. But Tobias felt a swell of pride as they approached. He had built most of it with his own hands after returning from the war, had turned the raw land into something productive through sheer determination and back-breaking work. "It is not fancy," he said as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, "but it is solid and weatherproof." Rosalie looked at the house, and something in her expression softened slightly. It was a simple structure, but he could see that it was well maintained, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides and curtains visible in the windows. He helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The interior was indeed lacking a woman's touch. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space all in one. It was clean enough, but sparse and utilitarian. Dishes were stacked on open shelves, and his few pieces of furniture were arranged more for function than comfort. "Your room is through here," he said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom with a real bed frame, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "The linens are clean. I will bring in some water so you can wash up, and then I will make supper." "You cook?" The surprise in her voice was evident. I have managed not to starve these past 2 years, he said with a slight smile, though I will admit my skills are limited to basic fare. One of the reasons I could use help. He left her to settle in and went back out to unload the wagon and tend to the horses. By the time he returned to the house with a bucket of fresh water from the well, he could hear sounds of movement from her room. He set the bucket outside her door and knocked softly. "Water for washing," he called, then retreated to the kitchen to give her privacy. He started a fire in the stove and set about making a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. It was nothing fancy, but it was filling and hot. He was just setting the table when Rosalie emerged from her room. She had washed her face and hands and attempted to tidy her hair, though she clearly had no brush or pins to properly secure it. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the table. "Food is ready." She sat stiffly in one of the chairs, watching him warily as he filled 2 plates and set one in front of her. He noticed she did not start eating until he did, and even then, her bites were small and cautious, as if she expected the food to be taken away at any moment. "How did you end up on that auction block?" Tobias asked after a few minutes of silent eating. "If you do not mind my asking." Rosalie set down her fork carefully. "My father died 3 months ago. He had debts I did not know about. The bank claimed our farm, sold everything we had, and it still was not enough to cover what he owed. The judge said I could either go to debtor's prison or work off the remaining amount through contracted labor." She paused, her hands tightening on the edge of the table. "I chose the labor. No other family. My mother died when I was young. I have no brothers or sisters. My father and I managed the farm ourselves after she passed." Her voice was flat, carefully emotionless, but Tobias could see the pain beneath the surface. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for your loss and for what happened after." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was. "Why are you being kind to me? Why would I be anything else? Because you own me, at least according to that contract." "A piece of paper does not make you property, Rosalie. It just means you work for me until a debt is paid. There is a difference." He met her eyes steadily. "I meant what I said. You will be treated with respect here. You have my word." Something in her expression cracked slightly, a tiny breach in the wall she had built around herself. She quickly looked away, but not before he saw the sheen of tears in her eyes. They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, less hostile and more contemplative. When the plates were empty, Rosalie stood and began collecting the dishes. "Let me wash these," she said. "You have had a long day. It can wait until tomorrow." "I would rather be useful." There was a firmness to her voice now, a need to establish some kind of normalcy or control in her upended life. Tobias nodded and let her work, understanding that she needed this. Instead, he went outside to make his evening rounds, checking on the cattle in the near pasture and securing the barn for the night. When he returned to the house, the dishes were clean and drying on the counter, and Rosalie was standing by the window, looking out at the darkening prairie. "It is very isolated out here," she said softly. "Yes, the nearest neighbor is 5 miles south. Town is 15 miles back the way we came. Does that bother you?" "I do not know yet." She turned to face him. "I have never lived anywhere that was not surrounded by other farms and families." "It takes some getting used to," he admitted, "but I find I prefer the quiet. Too many people and too much noise make me uneasy." "Because of the war?" He was surprised she had guessed. "Yes, I was with the Union cavalry for 3 years. When I came home, I found I could not tolerate crowds anymore. The noise, the chaos, it all reminded me too much of things I would rather forget." Rosalie nodded slowly. "My father fought too. He never spoke of it, but sometimes he would wake up screaming in the night. Toward the end, it got worse." I think that is part of why he drank so much, why he made bad decisions about money. He was trying to drown the memories. They stood there in the growing darkness, two people scarred by the aftermath of a brutal war, finding an unexpected common ground. Tobias lit a lamp, casting warm light across the room. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to start working out a routine. I will show you around the property, explain what needs doing, and we will figure out how to divide the tasks." Rosalie nodded and moved toward her room, but she paused at the doorway and turned back. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did today. Whatever your reasons, you saved me from something much worse. I will not forget that." Before he could respond, she disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Tobias stood alone in the lamplight, wondering what he had gotten himself into, and knowing he would make the same choice again if given the chance. The next morning, Tobias woke before dawn, as was his habit. He dressed quietly and went to the kitchen to start coffee and breakfast. He was surprised to find Rosalie already there, feeding wood into the stove. She had clearly slept in her dress, having nothing else to wear, and her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. "You are up early," he said. "I am used to rising before dawn. The farm work did not do itself." She glanced at him. "I hope you do not mind that I started the fire." "Not at all. Coffee will be ready soon." They worked together in companionable silence, Tobias cooking bacon and eggs while Rosalie made biscuits from the supplies he had bought in town. It felt strange to have another person in the house, to hear the rustling of skirts and the soft sounds of someone else moving about. Strange, but not unpleasant. After breakfast, Tobias showed her around the property. He introduced her to the dozen chickens that provided eggs, showed her the vegetable garden that desperately needed weeding, explained his system for managing the cattle that grazed on the open range. Rosalie listened carefully, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood farm life. "I have about 200 head of cattle," he explained as they stood looking out over the pasture. "I run them on open range mostly, but I keep some close to the house for milk and breeding. Twice a year, I drive the marketable steers to Leavenworth to sell. That is where most of my income comes from." "You manage all that alone?" "I hire a couple of hands during roundup and the drive, but mostly yes. It is why other things have suffered." He gestured back toward the house. "The garden, the chickens, the house itself. There are not enough hours in the day to manage everything properly." "I can help with those things," Rosalie said. "I am good with chickens and gardens. My father and I kept both on our farm." "I was hoping you would say that." They worked out a division of labor over the next few days. Rosalie took over the household tasks, the garden, and the chickens. She was a good cook, far better than Tobias, and meals became something to look forward to rather than a necessity to endure. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized his haphazard storage, and mended the curtains that had been torn for months. Tobias found himself enjoying her company more than he had expected. She was quiet, but not sullen. When she did speak, her observations were often sharp and occasionally funny in a dry way that caught him off guard. She worked hard without complaint, but he made sure she took breaks and was not pushed beyond reasonable limits. One evening about 2 weeks after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the prairie. It had become a habit, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Tobias would smoke his pipe while Rosalie worked on mending clothes or other handwork. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they did not, but the silence between them had become comfortable rather than awkward. "Can I ask you something?" Rosalie said, setting down her sewing. "Of course. What happened to you in the war?" "You do not have to answer if you do not want to, but I find myself curious." Tobias was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the dying sunlight painted the clouds in shades of orange and pink. I was at Wilson's Creek, Shiloh, and Stone's River, among others. I saw things no person should have to see, did things I am not proud of because they were necessary to survive. He paused, his hands tightening on the pipe. I lost friends, good men who should have lived long lives. By the time it was over, I felt hollowed out. Like everything that made me human had been scraped away. But you came back. You built this place. I did. Because I realized that the best way to honor the men who did not come home was to actually live, not just exist. This ranch, it is more than just a business. It is proof that I survived, that I can build something instead of destroying it. Rosalie was quiet, absorbing his words. Then she said softly, I think they would be proud of what you have made here. I think you should be proud too. He looked at her then, struck by the gentle understanding in her voice. In the fading light, she looked softer somehow, the hard edges of wariness that had defined her for the first days beginning to blur. Her hair caught the last rays of sunlight, turning it a burnished copper, and he felt something shift in his chest. Thank you, he said, meaning it deeply. As the weeks passed into months, the rhythm of the ranch life settled into something that felt almost natural. Rosalie proved herself invaluable, not just with the household tasks but with her insights about the ranch itself. She suggested improvements to the chicken coop that increased egg production, helped him plan a better layout for the garden, and even assisted with some of the lighter cattle work. Tobias found himself looking forward to seeing her each morning, to hearing her voice, to the small smiles she gave him when she thought he was not looking. He was careful not to push, not to make her uncomfortable, but he could not deny that his feelings were growing into something beyond simple appreciation for her help. One day in late September, a storm rolled in across the prairie with frightening speed. Tobias had been out checking fences when he saw the dark clouds building on the horizon. He raced back to the house, knowing they were in for a bad one. Rosalie was already securing the shutters when he arrived. I saw it coming, she called over the rising wind. Everything outside is tied down. Good. Get inside. This looks like it could be a big one. They barely made it inside before the storm hit with full force. Rain lashed against the house in sheets and the wind howled like a living thing. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it made the walls shake. Tobias lit lamps as the sky darkened to an unnatural twilight. I have never seen it come on so fast, Rosalie said, her voice tense as she watched through the window. Prairie storms can be unpredictable, but the house is solid. We will be fine. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Rosalie jump, and Tobias saw her hands were shaking. Are you all right? I do not like storms, she admitted. When I was a child, a tornado came through and destroyed 3 farms near ours. I have been afraid ever since. Come away from the window, Tobias said gently. Sit here by the stove. I will make some tea. She did as he suggested, wrapping her arms around herself as another boom of thunder rattled the house. Tobias busied himself with the tea, giving her time to compose herself. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed, and he felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. The storm raged for over an hour. At one point, the wind got so strong that Tobias worried about the barn roof, but there was nothing to be done until the weather passed. He sat across from Rosalie at the table, and they talked to distract her from the violence outside. She told him about growing up on the farm, about her mother who had died from fever, about the small joys and large struggles of her life before everything had fallen apart. I used to dream of traveling, she said, cupping the tea in both hands. Of seeing the ocean or the big cities back east. My mother had been to St. Louis once as a girl, and she would tell me stories about the buildings and the crowds and the shops full of things we could never afford. I wanted that adventure. Why did you not go? Before your father died, I mean, you could have left the farm and abandoned him. He needed me, especially after he came back from the war. I could not leave him alone. He had already lost so much. She looked down at her tea. Besides, where would I have gone? A woman alone with no money and no connections. It would have been dangerous and foolish. Perhaps, or perhaps you would have found your way. She smiled slightly. You have more faith in my capabilities than I do. I do not think that is true. I have seen how capable you are, Rosalie. You have rebuilt your life from nothing. That takes strength most people do not have. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, something electric and undeniable. The air felt charged, and not just from the storm outside. Tobias wanted to reach across the table to take her hand, to tell her that she had become essential to his life in ways that went far beyond the practical. But he held back. She was here because of a contract, because she had no choice. He would not take advantage of that, would not press his feelings on her when she might feel obligated to reciprocate. If something was to develop between them, it had to be because she wanted it, freely and without coercion. The storm finally passed, leaving the prairie washed clean and sparkling in the late afternoon sun. They went outside together to assess the damage. A few shingles had blown off the barn roof, and one of the fence posts near the house had come down, but overall they had weathered it well. Better than I feared, Tobias said, surveying the property. We were lucky. Rosalie's face was turned up to the clearing sky, and she looked peaceful in a way he had not seen before. Thank you for helping me through that. I know I was being silly about the thunder. Fear is not silly. And you did not need much help. You are stronger than you think. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something new in her eyes, a softness, a considering look, as if she was seeing him differently than before. His heart began to beat faster. Tobias, she said softly, and just the way she said his name made something in his chest tighten. But then she shook her head slightly. I should start supper. You will be hungry after all that worry. She walked back to the house, leaving him standing in the muddy yard, wondering what she had been about to say. October arrived with cooler temperatures, and the first hints of autumn color on the few trees that dotted the prairie. Tobias made another trip to Leavenworth for supplies, and this time he did something he had not planned. He bought fabric, 2 lengths of sturdy cotton in different patterns, along with needles and thread. When he presented them to Rosalie that evening, her eyes went wide. What is this? You have been wearing the same dress for 2 months. I thought you might like material to make something new. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the fabric. This is too much. The contract does not require you to provide anything beyond basic necessities. I am not doing it because of the contract. I am doing it because I want to, because you deserve to have more than one dress. He paused, then added quietly, because I care about your comfort and happiness. Rosalie looked up at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. Why are you so kind to me? After everything, after the way I came here, you treat me like I matter, like I am a person and not just labor to be used up. Because you do matter, Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion. You matter to me, more than I probably should say given the circumstances. But it is the truth. She set the fabric down carefully and took a step toward him. They were standing very close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. Tobias, she said again, and this time she did not stop. I need to tell you something. These past months here, working with you, talking with you, just being near you, I have felt more at peace than I have in years. You have given me safety and respect and kindness I did not expect. And somewhere along the way I started to feel something more. Something I do not think I should feel, given how we met, given the contract between us. But I cannot help it. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. What are you saying? I am saying that I have come to care for you. Deeply. And it terrifies me because I do not know if these feelings are real or if they are just gratitude or relief, or some confused response to you saving me. But when you look at me the way you are looking at me right now, I feel like I might understand what my mother meant when she told me about meeting my father. She said it was like coming home to a place she had never been before. Tobias reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hand. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, just below where the bruise had been when he first saw her. It had long since healed, but he would never forget the sight of it. I have been halfway in love with you since the day I brought you home, he said quietly. Maybe even since I saw you on that auction block, standing there with your head up despite everything. But I did not want to say anything because of the contract, because I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured. Your freedom to choose is important to me, more important than my feelings. What if I choose you? Rosalie whispered. What if I choose this? Then I would be the most fortunate man in Kansas. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as he responded. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a long moment, the world consisted of nothing but the two of them, the warmth between them, the rightness of finally acting on feelings they had both been fighting. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie laughed softly. I have wanted to do that for weeks. You have been driving me mad, Tobias admitted. The way the sunlight catches in your hair, the way you hum when you are working in the garden, the way you listen when I talk like what I am saying actually matters. Everything about you has become essential to my happiness. So what do we do now? She asked, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Now we court properly. I want to do this right, Rosalie. I want you to be sure of your feelings, sure of me. I want there to be no doubt in your mind that you are choosing this freely. She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her breathtakingly beautiful. I think I would like that very much. Over the following weeks, they navigated their new relationship with care and growing joy. Tobias courted her like any young man courting a young woman, despite the unusual circumstances of their situation. He picked wildflowers for her, taught her to ride one of the gentler horses, took her on a picnic by the creek that ran through his property. They talked endlessly, sharing histories and dreams and fears. Rosalie told him about her childhood, about the loss of her mother, about the gradual decline of her father after the war. Tobias shared more about his own experiences, about the things he had witnessed and done, about the slow process of healing that had led him to build this ranch. I used to think I would never feel whole again, he told her one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. But being with you, I feel like the pieces are finally coming back together. You make me feel brave, Rosalie said. Like I can dream again about the future instead of just surviving day to day. As November arrived, bringing the first real cold, they settled into a comfortable domesticity that felt like a preview of what a shared life could be. Rosalie made new curtains from the fabric Tobias had bought, brightening the house. She cooked his favorite meals and laughed when he tried to help in the kitchen, and inevitably made a mess. They read together in the evenings, taking turns with one of the few books he owned, and talked about everything and nothing. One night, as they sat by the fire, Rosalie brought up the contract. I have been thinking about the debt. If I am careful with expenses and we calculate fair wages for my work, I should have it paid off in about 3 years instead of 5. Tobias frowned. Why are you thinking about that? Because I want to be free to make my own choices. I want to court you, truly court you, without the shadow of that contract hanging over us. I want to be sure, and I want you to be sure, that anything between us is real and not complicated by obligation." He understood what she was saying, but it still made something in his chest tighten. "I tore up that contract weeks ago, Rosalie. I should have told you sooner, but I burned it in the stove the night you first kissed me. You have been free since then." She stared at him in shock. "What?" "But the debt, the legal obligation. I will pay off the remainder to the court. You do not owe me anything. You never did, not really. I do not want you here because of a piece of paper. I want you here because you choose to be here." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You tore it up. You just freed me without saying anything. I was going to tell you, I just wanted to find the right moment." He reached for her hand. "You are not bound to me, Rosalie. You can leave tomorrow if you want. You can go anywhere, do anything. I will give you money to start over, help you get wherever you want to go." "You foolish, wonderful man," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Do you really think I would leave now? Do you think I want to be anywhere but here with you? I want you to know that you can. That is all. I want you to know you have choices." She launched herself at him, kissing him with a passion that made his head spin. When she pulled back, her eyes were blazing with emotion. "I choose you, Tobias Zimmerman. I choose this life, this ranch, this future we could build together. Not because I have to, but because I want to with everything in me." "Then I am the luckiest man alive," he said, pulling her close again. December brought snow and bitter cold, but inside the house there was warmth and growing love. Tobias asked Rosalie to marry him on Christmas Eve, presenting her with a simple gold band he had bought during a secret trip to town. She said yes without hesitation, and they married in early January at the small church in Leavenworth, with the minister and his wife as witnesses. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of not just bodies but souls that had found each other against impossible odds. Rosalie had never known such gentleness and care from a man, and Tobias had never imagined he could feel so complete, so utterly at peace. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness as they lay tangled together afterward. "I never thought I would say those words to anyone, but I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "and you never have to be scared again. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Their first year of marriage was filled with the usual adjustments and challenges of two people learning to truly share a life. There were disagreements, mostly minor, about how to run the household or manage the ranch. There were difficult days when the work seemed endless and the weather uncooperative. But through it all, their love deepened and grew stronger. Rosalie proved herself invaluable to the ranch operations. She had a good head for numbers and took over the bookkeeping, discovering ways to save money and increase profits. She suggested expanding the chicken operation, and soon they were selling eggs in town along with the cattle. Her garden flourished under her care, providing not just food for their table but surplus to sell or preserve. In the spring, Tobias bought her a horse of her own, a pretty bay mare with a gentle disposition. Rosalie named her Clover and learned to ride well enough to accompany Tobias when he checked on the distant parts of their range. Those rides together became some of their favorite times, just the two of them and the endless prairie, talking and laughing, and simply enjoying being together. One warm day in May, as they sat by the creek during one of these rides, Rosalie took Tobias's hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is something I need to tell you." He looked at her questioningly, then understanding dawned. "Are you?" "Yes, I am with child. The baby should come sometime in late October or early November." Joy flooded through him, so intense it almost hurt. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby," she confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "You have given me everything, Rosalie. A home that feels like a home, love I never expected to find, and now this. How did I get so fortunate we found each other?" she said simply. "That is what happened. In the worst possible circumstances, we still found each other. And now we get to build a family together." The pregnancy progressed well, though Tobias became comically overprotective, worrying about every little thing. Rosalie tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from a place of deep love. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest frequently, and made sure she was eating enough. "I am growing a baby not made of glass," she teased one day when he practically carried her to a chair after she stood too long at the stove. "You are precious cargo," he countered. "Both of you. Humor me." As summer progressed, Rosalie's belly grew round and they spent the long evenings talking about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about hopes and dreams for their child. Tobias began building a cradle in the barn during spare moments, carefully sanding and shaping the wood until it was smooth as silk. In September, he hired a young cowhand named Jim to help with the autumn roundup and the cattle drive. This was the first time he had brought someone else onto the ranch since Rosalie had arrived, and he wanted to make sure he would have help with the heavy work once the baby came. Jim was a good-natured young man of about 19, hard-working and respectful, and Rosalie approved of the addition. The baby came on a cold night in early November. Tobias had ridden to town to fetch the midwife when Rosalie's labor began, making the 30-mile round trip in record time. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tobias feared he would lose her, lose them both. He paced the main room like a caged animal, praying harder than he had since the war. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. The midwife emerged from the bedroom, tired but smiling. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Zimmerman, and your wife is doing well. She is asking for you." Tobias entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Rosalie was propped up against pillows, exhausted and pale but radiantly beautiful, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she said softly. "Come meet him." Tobias approached the bed and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was perfect. "Can I hold him?" Tobias asked, his voice rough with emotion. Rosalie carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Tobias felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This tiny person, created from his love with Rosalie, was real and breathing and alive in his arms. "What should we name him?" Rosalie asked. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Tobias knew. "Thomas, after my father, Thomas Zimmerman." "Thomas," Rosalie repeated, testing it out. "Yes, that is perfect." The midwife stayed for 2 days to make sure both mother and baby were thriving, then returned to town with Tobias's profound thanks and generous payment. Jim helped manage the ranch work, while Tobias devoted himself to caring for his family. He changed diapers, brought Rosalie meals in bed, and walked the floor with baby Thomas during the long nights when the infant fussed. "You are a natural father," Rosalie told him one morning as she watched him gently rock their son back to sleep. "Look at how peaceful he is with you." "He is a good baby. Takes after his mother," Tobias said, carefully laying Thomas in the cradle he had built. "I think he has your chin and your stubbornness," Rosalie said with a smile. "Did you see how he fights sleep? That is all you." As winter settled in, Their life fell into a new rhythm built around the needs of a newborn. It was exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. There were nights when they were both so tired they could barely function, and moments when Thomas would not stop crying no matter what they did. But there were also moments of perfect joy when the baby would smile or make a cooing sound, and they would look at each other in wonder at what they had created. One night in late December, after Thomas had finally fallen asleep after a particularly fussy evening, Tobias and Rosalie sat together by the fire. She was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder, both of them too tired to move but content in each other's presence. "Do you ever think about that day in Leavenworth?" Rosalie asked softly. "The auction?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "I was so frightened that day. I thought my life was over, that I would end up broken and used up, dying in misery far from anything I had known. And then you stepped in, this stranger with kind eyes, and everything changed." She tilted her head to look at him. "I asked you why, do you remember? Why you bought me?" "I remember." "If you had not answered the way you did, if you had said something else or acted differently, I would have run at the first opportunity. I was prepared to escape and take my chances on my own, even knowing how dangerous that would be. I am glad you stayed. So am I. Because look at what we have now. This home, our son, a future I never could have imagined. All because you saw a person worth saving instead of just a transaction." She reached up to cup his face. "You gave me back my life, Tobias. More than that, you gave me a life worth living." "You did the same for me," he said, turning his head to kiss her palm. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, working the ranch, but not really living. You brought light back into my world. You made me want to be a better man. You were already a good man. I just helped you see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of their sleeping son. Finally, Rosalie spoke again. "I want more of this. More children, more life, more everything with you. Is that greedy?" "It is not greedy to want happiness, and I want the same things." He tightened his arm around her. "As many children as we are blessed with, growing old together, watching our family grow, all of it." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under their joint management. They added more cattle, expanded the garden and chicken operations, and eventually built a larger barn and additional outbuildings. Jim stayed on as a permanent hand, proving himself invaluable and becoming almost like family. When Thomas was 2 years old, Rosalie gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Alice, both healthy and strong with their mother's auburn hair and their father's gray eyes. The house that had once seemed so empty was now filled with the chaos and joy of 3 young children. "We need a bigger house," Tobias said one evening after finally getting all 3 children to sleep. "This one is bursting at the seams." "Or we could add on," Rosalie suggested. "I love this house. It is where we started our life together. I do not want to leave it." So they added on, building additional bedrooms and expanding the main room. Tobias did most of the work himself with Jim's help, and Rosalie managed the household and children while simultaneously offering suggestions and critiques on the construction. It took the better part of a year, but when it was finished, they had a home that was both spacious and comfortable, filled with handmade furniture and personal touches that made it uniquely theirs. The children grew quickly, as children do. Thomas became a serious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and learning everything he could about ranching. The twins were inseparable, getting into mischief together and keeping Rosalie constantly on her toes. 2 years after the twins came another son, William, and then a daughter, Sarah, completing their family at 6 children. Our own little tribe. Tobias joked one morning at breakfast as he surveyed the table full of children in various stages of eating and arguing and laughing. "Our blessing," Rosalie corrected, though she was smiling as she said it. Despite the challenges of raising a large family on a working ranch, Tobias and Rosalie's love never wavered. They made time for each other, whether it was a few stolen moments on the porch after the children were asleep, or the occasional ride out to their favorite spot by the creek. Their physical relationship remained passionate and fulfilling, a connection that deepened rather than faded with time. "Do you remember what you told me once?" Rosalie asked him one night as they lay in bed, "about feeling like you would never be whole again after the war." "I remember. Do you still feel that way?" Tobias thought about it, about the life they had built together, about the children sleeping peacefully in nearby rooms, about the woman in his arms who had become the center of his world. "No," he said finally. "I do not feel broken anymore. I feel complete. You healed me, Rosalie. You and our children and this life we have made together. You made me whole again." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and he felt the same surge of love and desire he had felt the first time, proof that some things only grew stronger with time. As the children grew older, they each found their place on the ranch and in the family. Thomas showed a real talent for working with cattle and seemed destined to take over the ranch someday. Emma had her mother's head for numbers and loved helping with the bookkeeping. Alice was fascinated by the chickens and the garden, spending hours caring for the animals and plants. William was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and keeping everyone worried. And Sarah, the baby, was tender-hearted and gentle, loving everyone and everything with abandon. "We did well," Rosalie said one evening as they watched their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 12, was teaching William how to rope fence posts, while the girls played a complicated game that seemed to involve a lot of running and shrieking. "We did," Tobias agreed, his arm around her waist. "I look at them and I can hardly believe they are ours, that we made them and raised them and somehow have not completely ruined them yet." Rosalie laughed. "The fact that you worry about that proves you are a good father. Bad fathers never question whether they are doing it right." Over the years, the story of how Tobias and Rosalie met became family legend. The children loved hearing about the auction, about their father's dramatic bid, about their mother asking why and his answer that changed everything. As they got older, they understood more about the difficult circumstances and the injustices their mother had faced, and it made them appreciate their family even more. "You were very brave," Emma told her mother once, "standing up there in front of all those people, not knowing what would happen." "I was terrified," Rosalie admitted, "but I tried not to show it, and then your father appeared like something out of a story and saved me. Though I did not know I was being saved at the time, I thought I was just being sold to a different master. But he was not a master. He was your future husband. Yes, though neither of us knew that at the time either. We had to find our way to each other slowly, learning to trust and eventually to love." "I want to find love like that someday," Emma said wistfully. "I hope you do, sweetheart. I hope all of you find people who see you for who you really are and love you for it. That is what your father gave me. He saw past the circumstances to the person underneath, and he treated me with dignity and respect when no one else would. That is how I knew he was special." Time continued its inexorable march forward. The ranch prospered and grew. Thomas married a local girl and brought her to live on the ranch, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations as Tobias slowed down. The twins both married, Emma to a banker in Leavenworth and Alice to a neighboring rancher's son. William headed west to try his fortune in Colorado, writing long letters about his adventures. And Sarah, their baby, found love with a young veterinarian and married him in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Through it all, Tobias and Rosalie remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love was legendary in the family, held up as an example of what true partnership looked like. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard, multiple generations brought together by the love of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. That evening, after the party had wound down and most of the family had retired for the night, Tobias and Rosalie walked out to their favorite spot by the creek. They moved slower now, their hair gray and their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work, but they still walked hand in hand like young lovers. 30 years, Rosalie said, looking up at the stars. It feels like forever and no time at all. The best 30 years of my life, Tobias said. And I would not change a single moment, even the difficult ones, because they all led us here. Do you remember what you said that first day? When I asked why you bought me, I remember every word. I said you looked like you needed someone too, and that no person should be sold like cattle. And I could not let Morrison get his hands on you. Your answer changed everything for me, because you did not say you bought me for yourself, for what I could do for you. You said you did it for me, because it was the right thing to do. That is when I started to hope that maybe, just maybe, things might be different. She squeezed his hand. You gave me back my freedom, and then you gave me your heart. You made me feel valued and seen and loved. You gave me a family and a home and a life beyond anything I had dreamed possible. And you gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You filled my empty house with laughter and love. You gave me children and grandchildren and joy I never thought I would experience. You healed parts of me I thought were broken beyond repair. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I have loved you for 30 years, Rosalie Zimmerman. I loved you when you were scared and wary. I loved you when you were pregnant and uncomfortable. I loved you through sleepless nights with crying babies and difficult harvests and every challenge life has thrown at us. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Tears streamed down Rosalie's face. I love you too, so much. You are my home, Tobias. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. They kissed there in the moonlight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that exceeded anything either could have imagined alone. Around them, the prairie stretched endless and peaceful, the same prairie that had witnessed their first days together, that had been both backdrop and participant in their love story. The years continued to pass gently. Tobias and Rosalie grew old together, surrounded by the family they had created. They passed the ranch officially to Thomas, but remained living in the house they had expanded together all those years ago. They spent their days working in the garden, playing with grandchildren, and enjoying the quiet contentment of a life well lived. When Tobias finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Rosalie was holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, as did their entire family. But even in her grief, she felt grateful for the years they had shared, for the love that had sustained them through everything. She lived 4 more years without him, years filled with family and memories, and the satisfaction of seeing her children and grandchildren thriving. She told the story of how she and Tobias met countless times, always with a smile, always emphasizing how a single act of kindness from a stranger had changed everything. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, just as Tobias had. Her last words to Thomas, spoken earlier that day, were about his father. "Tell him I am coming home," she said. "Tell him I never stopped loving him." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, a simple headstone marking their resting place. The inscription read, Tobias Zimmerman, 1842–1920, and Rosalie Zimmerman, 1850–1924. Beloved parents and grandparents, their love changed everything. The ranch continued on through the generations. Each inheritor told the story of Tobias and Rosalie, of how their love had begun at an auction block in Leavenworth, and grew into something that sustained not just them, but an entire family tree. It became a story about courage and kindness, about choosing to see the humanity in another person, about love that overcomes impossible odds. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, some family members swore they could still feel the presence of that love, still lingering in the house and the land, a testament to two people who found each other when they both needed it most and built something beautiful together that would endure long after they were gone.